Hey everybody, I just wanted to talk briefly on prototyping in general without getting into any specifics on this project behind me as it evolves. Rule number one, your prototype is just your prototype. It's not the final piece. So in order to fight the natural inclination to make your prototype and just kind of cobble on that until it's good enough, you're going to make the first prototype out of some material that is cheap and you know is not going to be used for the final. In this case, I'm using plywood, which has a very different finish than our final on this one, which we're going to be finishing in material called Medex, which is like a high-density fiberboard. We have Stunt Dog. So the original prototype, you're going to take what is basically just your best guess at your finish. To make an analogy to writing, your first draft is just that. It's your first draft. It's not your final. And the first draft is going to go through so many revisions by the time you get to your final, it's going to be barely recognizable. Like this one to its predecessors. I used a different material on this one. It was something that is a material that is relatively inexpensive and also had on hand. And a lot of this is actually scrap offcuts from previous pieces, so there was no real materials loss in at least the outside part of this. So on this one, you can probably tell that I am not worried in any way about style or how it looks. This one was just to make some first guesses on how the function was going to work, how the ball was going to roll, and then make edits from there. On draft 2 here, I'm now using a material that is not actually my final, but it is much more dimensionally close to my final, so I can get all of my fine-tuning, milling, where all of these parts insert into each other much more accurately and start making modifications from there, where I'm moving my geometry on the orders of 1/100th of an inch or thereabouts. This one is much more functionally final. As you can see, there's a much different hole pattern than on the last one, and that is something that we have continued to change and refine as we have gone from this one to our actual final. And so on this piece here, it was close enough to our final that we were able to much more fine-tune how the gameplay was going to work, how many balls would be best to have, the size of the hole, the configuration of the hole. And the physical part of the game was about as far as we got on this one, because the hole pattern changed enough that it wasn't worth it to do a mock-up of the electronics that'd be reading the balls dropping through until we made it to the next version. On this one, our hole pattern is actually really close to the final. I've made a couple of modifications between this and what is actually the manufacturing production run. You can also see that we've added some stylistic details. In this case, we made it look like a bone instead of more like the sleek race car that's standard to more of just the generic carnival style of this type of game. And some other minor tweaks and modifications to the geometry, most of which you can't see because that just kind of goes into how the sausage is made. So what I kind of find to be one of the best ways of forcing yourself to obey rule number 1, and as far as I've gone in this, rule number only, is your choice of materials. You're going to use a cheaper, more inexpensive material, perhaps, than whatever the final thing is going to be out of. So you're going to be less afraid to just take that and throw it away. And you are also, in a very real sense, not able to use this as the final finish one, because this material, this cheap big box store grade MDF, is just not a high enough quality for us to use for the final production run. And that's really as far as I'm getting with the rules on prototyping. It's that your prototype is just your prototype, and you can't be afraid to take that piece, make it as well as you can, learn everything you can from that iteration, and then basically throw it away and start over again, which is what we're going to be showing you next with the pieces that we're actually doing the full production run of. So we'll see you in a later video momentarily.